Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Want to Achieve Net Zero by 2040? Learn your 2023 action items. I'm excited today to have Sherry Frey from Nielsen IQ and Nicole Sullivan from CarbonBetter here to explore the latest data regarding sustainability claims by industry, how consumer perceptions about sustainability are changing, ways to prioritize and plan work in 2023 to achieve 2040 goals, how to confidently make claims even in high growth organizations with rapidly expanding footprints, and why it's so critical to report on progress and challenges and not just successes. First, my name is Dominic Sung, and I'll be moderating our discussion today. I'm Director of Business Development here at CarbonBetter for our sustainability and decarbonization services. And after a 20-year career in energy derivatives trading and commodity-linked structured finance, I've recently joined CarbonBetter. Whether we're helping clients quantify their impacts, create comprehensive sustainability reports, or decarbonize through direct reductions and participating in the traded voluntary carbon markets, we strive to do so with transparency and traceability. And before I hand it over to our speakers for introductions, I'd like to point out the questions feature. Please use the questions box to ask any questions, and we will work to answer them at the end of this session. Sherry, could you introduce yourself and Nielsen IQ to our audience today?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. I'm Sherry Frey with Nielsen IQ. And I think, Dominic, if you flip to the next slide, I'll tell a little bit about our organization. Oh, maybe even the next one. There we go. So many of you might know, you might hear Nielsen. We're actually Nielsen IQ or NIQ. And what we do is we actually look at the grocery sales data. We look at sales data across the store, across 90 markets, as well as consumer information. We have the most complete view of consumers and markets across the world. And we're really excited to share with you today some of the things that we're seeing there. I lead our total wellness industry engagement. And for us, for total wellness is really a look at how consumers are looking at not just their own personal health and wellness, but also the health of the planet and a little bit about what we'll talk about today, that social responsibility or the health of each other.
Thanks, Sherry. And Nicole, for those that haven't seen a previous webinar with you on it, can you please introduce yourself and what you do here at CarbonBetter?
Sure. So hi, I'm Nicole Sullivan. I'm Director of Climate Services for CarbonBetter, and I'm actually an environmental engineer by trade. So I really help clients with any stage of their sustainability journey, everything from quantifying their environmental impacts and doing their carbon accounting, to setting strategies, creating a roadmap for how they're going to decarbonize. And then I actually help clients to actively decarbonize, whether that's taking direct reductions at their facility or participating in the voluntary carbon market. So I'm actually really excited about our topic today because it really is a passion of mine to help people make progress wherever they are.
Awesome, thank you. So 702 companies on the Fortune 2000 have made some form of net zero pledges as of mid-2022. But there's a massive difference between making a pledge and achieving that goal. I mean, I've often observed frustratedly as clients would set targets and joke that the target was, oh, it's far enough ahead that it's not going to be my problem, or hope that they kicked the can down the road far enough that they could deal with it more thoughtfully when they had more time or when they could bring someone on full time. We're here today to talk through what customers are looking for out of companies, and for those that have made pledges, the importance of taking direct, decisive action towards achieving them. Sherry, what are you seeing in recent data from Nielsen about whether sustainability is becoming more important to consumers?
So, we continue to see that sustainability is more important to consumers. Our research, we've been tracking this for a long time, and we saw, as many others, saw a spike during the pandemic, and I think one of the reasons was it was hard to deny climate change when we all stopped commuting, in March of 2020, and we saw that physical impact to our environment. But from a consumer perspective, we actually just released some global research. You'll see a few of the slides here today on sustainability. And you can see, consumers are telling us, it's just in the news so much more. They're actually being impacted by it. And in fact, we have seen, some of this research that we found have shown that consumers have said to us, they actually, 61% of consumers have said, I think the environment is having a negative impact on my health. So they really are, like I, kind of said, while we look at this from a total wellness perspective here at Nielsen IQ, they really are merging that idea of their personal their personal wellness and the wellness of the planet are very intertwined. One of the things that we are kind of seeing though is that what consumers are calling sustainability and what businesses are calling sustainability kind of varies a little bit. In fact, so in the global research that we found, globally we found there was a kind of a consistency from consumers that, at the top when they think about sustainability, they're looking at things like the environment, reduce pollution, or a cleaner environment, or protecting natural resources. But Nicole and Dominic, it was interesting because even that, what consumers said was sustainability varied across the countries. And so we saw developing markets actually had, they kind of included even more socially responsible things like better working conditions for workers or giving back to society. They lumped even those in more so into what they looked at when they called sustainability.
Yeah, that's such an important point. It's a word that's thrown around so much, but it truly means different things to different people, different businesses. And so it's a word that is really can be hard to define. Like the UN has defined it back in 1987, but otherwise, like it's kind of everyone's at their discretion defining sustainability and what it means for them. So I love that you touch on that with both consumers and businesses.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting too because we asked consumers, what are you doing, right, to live a sustainable
Hmm.
lifestyle? And and we're starting to hear more and more of like I'm eating a climate friendly diet. Those
Right.
sorts of things are starting to percolate up. But really, the top things that consumers say when we ask them, "What are you doing day in and day out?" For them, it's around like, "Hey, I'm taking a reusable shopping bag," or "I'm trying to minimize or avoid my waste," or watching my energy usage, and I'm recycling and I'm eating leftovers, and I'm looking at packaging. That those kind of be the ones
Mhm.
seem to be the ones that they're putting at the top of their list when they say this is what I'm doing in terms of taking responsibility. But we really do know, and I think this is a big part of today's conversation. They really are putting it back on brands and retailers. 46% of consumers are saying we actually expect brands to be doing leading the way on sustainability for us.
For sure.
So, if regardless of how someone defines that for themselves in terms of what sustainability is, Nicole, if sustainability is becoming more important and more companies are making sustainability claims, do you think consumers trust sustainability claims?
So I'm going to start with some data because not just my opinion. Like I think there's clear evidence that consumers don't trust claims. So if you could go to the next slide, that like they put their sustainability initiatives out there in such a way that that people are highly aware of those initiatives. But there's actually data that shows that consumers don't feel they know enough about a brand's sustainability claims and they don't feel like they have enough information to validate that claim. So in the US, more than 50% of people don't feel that they have sufficient information to trust a brand sustainability claim or a product claim. And it's actually particularly relevant in the beauty industry where 79% of shoppers have doubts about the claims. And I guess I would say that consumers are right to be skeptics in this case. So I've spent my career doing math on environmental impacts and really heavily in carbon. And I see carbon footprints all the time, or someone putting a number about, here are my emissions. And I personally, as a consumer, don't feel like I have the data to recreate their math or to trust their math. Like, here's a number. But there's so many different ways to do math. There's different emission factors, there's different data inputs. And then there's also different boundaries, right? Like saying you're carbon neutral, let's say, are you carbon neutral for your scope one emissions? Are you carbon neutral for scope one, two, and three? All of those things are important to making progress. But they're also very different levels of effort. They encompass very different things. So I do really believe traceability and transparency is hugely important in making claims. And I feel like in a lot of cases, people don't always have the data or the information to trust those claims. And I think it's important for brands that are making claims to back that up and tell people how you got there, show people your progress in a really trustworthy way. So Yes, both data and myself feel like there's a lot of concern around trusting claims today.
Awesome, thanks. I really think that seeing clear linkages between claims that people make and the math and logic of how companies arrive at the claim is just so vital to progress. And if trust can be established, it really just begs the question, are customers willing to pay a premium for that sustainability? Sherry, as you've done some analysis in this arena, what's come to light as companies evaluate whether making those net zero claims are worth it or not?
Yeah, so this is the question I'm probably asked the most often. Will they pay a premium? And the answer is yes and no. It actually really depends. What we're finding, is we kind of set this up. Sustainability means so many different things, and there's so many different claims. And in some cases, what we're finding in certain categories, there are sustainability claims that are just table stakes. It has become the expectation for the category that everybody's doing it. And so there's really no opportunity for a premium. Things like, BPA free in yogurt, that is a great example. Then there are other places where we're finding that there's innovators, there's early adopters, and there's a window for a price premium, absolutely. But, we would say we actually think that's not the question to be asking. Because right now, while you might have this window, but as the claim becomes more table stakes across your category, it really doesn't, give you that opportunity. Really, the thing that we are recommending our clients look at is loyalty. What we found in some research that we've been doing, and we're actually going to release next week in a major report, is that we're finding that brands that have a higher degree of ESG-related claims are actually enjoying a higher loyalty overall, and this is across the store. And we're also seeing that in general, again, when we look across the total store and we're looking at some of these sustainability claims and we're looking at price increases and we look and kind of compare versus other wellness related claims, it seems that the sustainability claims are more inflation resistant. They're actually, in general, just making your business more sustainable overall.
I think that's a really great point and a really great distinction that price increases for products aren't the only measure of value to a company or a brand. Sherry, do sustainability claims help a brand or a product differentiate from competitors in the market?
So yes, but one of the things, and if you want to jump to the next slide, Dominic, the reality is, what we're seeing, and I am teased often at Nielsen IQ. I love bubble charts, so let me orient you to what you're seeing here. We track sustainability. We've got 100 different attributes that we're tracking around sustainability. What you're seeing on this slide is just an example of a few of the ones that we're tracking. But we wanted to give you a little bit of a perspective of kind of like what's the lay of the land, what's happening. So as you look at this bubble chart, across the bottom, there's about 2,100 categories in the store on average. And so you can see across the bottom, this shows where that bubble is placed. It shows the number of categories that we're seeing that sort of claim, that sort of sustainability claim show up in. So you can see over on the far right, something like organic is really showing up in the, still only in over half of the categories in the store, but it's kind of that most penetrated. And then you can kind of see again over on the right, some, in that, if you look in that upper left, regenerative agriculture, the vertical axis, that's showing the growth versus 3 years ago. So you can see regenerative agriculture, really high growth numbers, but not in a lot of categories yet across the store. And then the size of the bubble shows the size of the sales. So again, a lot that we're showing you here in this bubble chart, but we just wanted to give you a little bit of the lay of the land of like, what's even showing up, for consumers when it comes to, claims on package around sustainability and what's the size. And so from our standpoint, we're looking at things like, we kind of look at the pillars of animal welfare, social responsibility, environmental sustainability, and then packaging. We kind of look at that and keep that very separately. And so again, here's a bit of what you can see. And so, the answer to your question is, yes, definitely the claims can help a product and a brand differentiate. But again, it's not just as simple as, putting a label, putting a claim on your package. It really has to be, and I think this is a big part of why we wanted to get together and talk today. it really has to be part of a bigger strategy, a bigger mission overall, and a very authentic claim as well.
Yeah, it really is such a nuanced subject that can be both personal and very different for companies that go about it. But as we've established that many have already made claims, and those claims can be a strong driver for value. Nicole, if you haven't made a public claim or commitment yet, what are some steps you should take prior to making a claim?
Yeah, sure. So before you make a claim or set a public target that you're publishing and putting out in the world, a really important first step is actually understanding your environmental baseline. So, what are your carbon, water, and waste impacts for a single year that's representative of typical operations? And don't panic if you've set a target and you haven't done those things yet. But those things are really paramount to being able to make a claim that you're able to back up. So if you haven't done your math, how are you going to track progress towards your target, right? So I would say, bottom line, step one, you have to know your impacts and where you're at today. And then if you've set a target at some future date, you should be, regularly and routinely, tracking your impacts and comparing them back to that baseline year so that you can see your progress towards that target. So that's one way to prepare. Another way to prepare is actually to consider like the expansion plans of your business and understand your supply chain. So if you're going to set a target, but you've made a claim or looking to make a claim, um, you've got to consider your operations today and where you're at, but you've also got to think through, complexities in your operations. If you're planning to, ramp up production, basically, once you've made those targets and made those claims, any expansions or any changes to your business, you'll want to make sure that those changes actually align with your targets and that you're able to expand in a way that doesn't set you back on your goals. And then lastly, like, doing your environmental baseline, making claims, setting targets, that can be really resource intensive. So maybe you have a sustainability role already on staff, or maybe you're looking to hire someone to be able to do this, or you need third party resources. Actually planning for that and like working that into your budget is a really important part of a sustainability journey, because once you take action, you're going to continue to take action and make progress, and that takes time and resources. So having a really good plan for that and knowing that you have resources allocated to that, can help set you up for success on that journey.
I think forward thinking and forethought and planning for all this is really, really vital, particularly when if you're stepping into this arena for the first time in a lot of cases. It may seem particularly daunting for those that feel they're not equipped or don't have the experience in it.
Yeah, and I'd like to actually add one more point too.
Yeah.
We're seeing a lot of people set future state targets, right, as far out as 2040 per title or even 2050. And that's great. But I think something else that I would like to see more of in the space is people setting interim milestones, so that they really are on track with reaching those targets and backing those claims.
I think that's really important as you're setting things that far out, that there are milestones along the way, and obviously as those things are, years, sometimes decades out into the future, it's a moving target, right? And you need to make adjustments. So those milestones are really important check-ins to adjust as you go. Thanks, Nicole.
Sure.
And Sherry, so there's so many factors to consider when somebody's running a business. Can sustainability progress drive growth, or is it just another cost?
So again, that's probably one of the biggest questions we get, is there a business case for sustainability? And, we know for so many brands, right, the stakeholder expectations are growing, but it's often really hard. And we hear that from clients a lot, like it's hard to make the business case pencil out, or we've made this big investment and it actually hasn't, made an impact for us. So again, another bubble chart. But again, wanted to kind of give you a big perspective of what's happening. This is a sneak peek, actually, of some research that we will be releasing next week that we did with McKinsey and Company, where we wanted to go and really analyze the data So we looked at the last 5 years of data across the store. We looked across all categories in the store, about 500,000 products, $400 billion in retail sales, to answer the question, like, does it drive growth? And what we found overall is that the answer is yes. There is a greater growth, across the categories. Over the last 5 years, they had, about 170 basis points more growth in the past 5 years than products that didn't have sustainable claims. But again, it wasn't, super simple. It's not that, it's an answer of you can just, slap X or slap Y on your package. But we wanted to show you here just a little bit of the lay of the land of where the categories in the store are falling. And the horizontal axis here, this is the percent of the claims, products with the claims. So you can see, household products and paper and plastics, actually a lot of claims up there in that upper right-hand quadrant. And then on the vertical axis, that shows where we're seeing the growth. So in what categories were we seeing a lot of claims in that upper right, and it's driving a lot of growth. And then there's categories like you can see pet food in the bottom left. There's not a lot of claims today, and the ones that are there aren't driving incremental growth. And we're not saying that the pet doesn't have an opportunity. In fact, we think pet is a great example of a space that has a lot of opportunity for more innovation around sustainability, more opportunities to really bring to market what consumers are looking for. And so to answer your question, at a high level, we did find that yes, there is, it really does drive greater growth. And then really, the research that you'll see next week, the next question I know you'll have is, well, who can drive the growth, right? And what we're finding is, it again varies, as you can see here, across categories. But we saw a lot of growth, interestingly, with private label. We also saw, as we expected, a lot of the challenger brands that were driving the growth. But we even saw on large brands and established brands, they were able, the sustainability claims were able to really drive a differentiated role for a big brand. So I think the exciting thing for us in the research was, it did prove out that there is a business case for sustainability, but it also proved out that everybody can play, really across the board. Everyone can play in the sustainability space.
Awesome. Well, thank you for the sneak peek at this data, and again for everybody else, let's keep an eye out for the data that's going to come out in a week or so. Is that right, Sherry?
Yep, next week.
Awesome. So let's just say then that, okay, I as a company am fully on board with the value proposition and this all fits, and I want to make an entry into the fray and desire to make a sustainability claim and take some steps on that sustainability journey. Nicole, what are the choices that I might be able to make for making progress? There's a lot of new certifications out there, along with reporting frameworks and softwares, and it can probably be pretty overwhelming for a lot of people who step into that or want to take some steps and don't really know what they don't know. But can you walk us through that a little bit in terms of what choices there are?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So there, to your point, it can be overwhelming because there are a whole lot of options for making progress, and it can be unclear which choices are most accurate versus your budget versus what you have the bandwidth to do. So if you could scroll one more slide, please. So you've probably seen some of these labels on packaging. I'm not here today to make a statement about any of these certifications and the efficacy of them, but I do want to just highlight, all of these brands or these certifications, when you see it on a packaging, it's intended to give you a trust signal, and it's intended to indicate some sort of claim, whether that's carbon neutral or net zero or climate friendly or any number of things. And a lot of these certifications have emerged to create kind of a low lift, repeatable process for brands to take action. And that's great, right? Like, we want people taking action, but that action doesn't necessarily mean that you've analyzed your full footprint accurately and reflective of your true operations versus, assumptions across an industry, or that you've done this math accurately, or that you've offset your emissions in a meaningful way. So I think, I would say, buyer beware, look into what these certifications mean, but it is an entry point, right, for brands to do something and to take action. So again, progress is important. but there's other options as well. We're seeing a lot of like software and SaaS-based solutions emerge as well, that are kind of intended to, on some level, be sold as an easy button, right? Like, how great! Like, I have this software, I put some of my data in, and it spits out my carbon footprint or my water impacts, and I have this number, and I can just run with it. But you know, a software solution is only as good as the calculation methodologies built into it, as well as it's only as good as the data that you as an end user put into it. And then emission factors change as data from, say, EPA becomes updated. So you also have to keep a software solution evergreen. So these things that are sold as this like off the shelf easy button, oftentimes are maybe not as easy to implement, even as like off the shelf, you just turn it on and plug your data in, right? Sometimes these require complex implementations, significant training of your stakeholders, as well as like it doesn't replace a business process to gather your data. And then we see, more and more companies are having in-house sustainability teams. They've seen they're doing their math, so they've hired someone to do that in-house, which is great, right? But then there's always that like trust signaling piece of, is there an opportunity to have your math third party verified? I think we're going to see a lot more third party verification happening as more people do start to pull some of this work in-house just to validate the numbers, right? It's a big deal to do your math and put it out there publicly. So you want to make sure that it's correct, right? Before you make claims around these numbers. The approach that we take at CarbonBetter, so when we're doing a full assessment of your environmental impacts, we do all of the math, and then we really believe in putting out your calculation methodologies, disclosing any assumptions you've made. As I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of ways to do this math, and sometimes it's, there's two right ways or even three right ways. So telling folks how you did it can add a lot of transparency and traceability. Um, and then once you've quantified your emissions, if you're taking that next step to decarbonize and offset your emissions or actively do projects, not all carbon credits are created equal. So some of those badges that we were looking at earlier, it might be a one-stop shop where they do the math and they give you some options for offsetting, but you're really limited to the carbon credits that they have available to them. But maybe those, not all carbon credits are created equal. So I think there's ways to do things where you're being really intentional with what credits you're using to really drive an impact and offset your emissions. And that's something to just think through. And I will say, like, everyone's sustainability journey, like, you may use different approaches as you continue to evolve, as you grow as an organization, as your resources change. So I'm not advocating for any one approach beyond being really traceable and making sure that there is accuracy when disclosing. But there are a lot of choices, and I would say some of them are better than others. So being really, clear and understanding, what a certification means or how you're doing your math, I think is important.
So we've discussed how sustainability claims can potentially spur growth, and if I'm a company, that started to go down this path, and we've made some choices as you kind of laid out, and you started to go through this, and I'm seeing growth. The company's being more successful. We are growing in all the metrics that we have, and if I'm a company that's in that growth phase, I might have concerns about raw notional numbers that we're quantifying for emissions that are interpreted and how that's interpreted as I grow my business. How do you navigate trying to reduce emissions while simultaneously expanding your operations? And can you explain the concept of emissions intensity a bit?
Yeah, sure. So when quantifying your carbon emissions, it's important to look at your overall carbon footprint, right? We typically look at that in total emissions, in metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. And we look at emissions in scope 1, which is your direct emissions, scope 2, indirect emissions, and then scope 3, which is kind of everything else, including your supply chain. So that would be your overall emissions footprint. But something that is also really important to consider consider is actually your emissions intensity. So this is your carbon footprint, your carbon emissions related to like a facet of your operations to be able to normalize those emissions on a per unit basis. So if you're making a product, emissions intensity might be in kilograms or grams of carbon dioxide equivalent per item that you manufactured. Or like if you're in office only type operation and your footprint is limited to the emissions associated with your office, it might be in terms of like full-time employee equivalents or emissions per square foot. So emissions intensity likely looks different depending on your operations, but it's a really important way of relating your emissions to where you are at scale. So if you've set targets, you've likely set some sort of target around your overall emissions, right? Going to reach net zero by this date for my carbon footprint. However, like it's something that's important to consider is that as your operations grow, as you scale, as you expand, say to that second or third facility, or you add on suppliers, even if you've done efficiency projects, you might still see an increase in emissions because maybe you're now operating, 24/7 and you used to only operate 5 days a week, or you've added extra boilers, whatever that might look like for you, your overall emissions as you grow could continue to grow with you, right? Depending on what you're doing to mitigate those emissions. But in tandem with that, as you also scale up your production rates, you've accounted for these energy efficiency projects or carbon offsets, your emissions intensity could in tandem go down as you scale up. So I like to encourage folks to also set emissions intensity targets. So to kind of make this make a little more sense, we have a case study here. So these are Beatbox's 2021 emissions. So on the left, you'll see their total carbon footprint for scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. And they actually use a co-packer. So in their case, the bulk of their emissions are in scope 3. But they had just over 6,800 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. And for us as consumers of products, like a metric ton is really like this hard thing to visualize, right? Like I've have been using that unit of measure for ages now, and I still like can't wrap my head around like what is a metric ton. But when you normalize that to a unit of product, so in the case of Beatbox, they have an emissions intensity of 445 grams of carbon dioxide equivalent per carton of Party Punch. Here's something you can hold in your hand. A gram is a lot more relatable to consumers. So I think the concept of emissions intensity is not just important from like a progress tracking perspective. Like, is your emissions per unit going down despite the fact that you're scaling because you are taking action? It's actually also a really important tool to relating to consumers and helping them really understand the impacts of this thing that they're consuming. So hopefully that helps. I get questions about that a lot as well, right? Everyone knows they need to do their footprint, but no one really, it's not as like necessarily common knowledge what your emissions intensity or energy intensity is. So that's something that I do like to highlight to folks.
Yeah, I think that really makes a ton of sense and helps to build that transparency and clarity around what the numbers actually mean in relation to something tangible, something more understandable, something more relatable as people are evaluating products and evaluating companies.
Definitely.
And really in relation to an entity's growth also, right? Like it's a lot more relatable and understanding of the numbers in terms of we may be growing in terms of the notional value, but is it growing on a relatable scale with the products that may be produced? So thank you for that.
Yeah, sure.
If a company can get comfortable with the value proposition and effort to set the target, and let's say you now have a 2030 or a 2040 or a 2050 target that you've now set, is it okay to just wait and meet your target a little bit later, or wait and let that sit a bit?
I would not encourage it. So if you're waiting to meet a target, and could you click to the next slide, please?
So sorry.
No worries. If you're waiting to meet a a target and you don't have a plan to get there, you definitely have this risk of not being able to actually meet your target. So we've talked a lot about the importance of doing your math, being able to track your progress. Like that takes time and resources, right? Also, it's going to take budget to meet your goals. If you have a certain footprint and it's, you're going to have to implement capital projects to actively decarbonize at your facility or at your office, or even if you're, say you've addressed those low hanging fruit items to decarbonize, and then you're going to use the voluntary carbon market as a tool to supplement and offset those harder to abate emissions. Like carbon credits cost money, right? So it's like there's a budget component to that. So if you're waiting and you get to 2039 and now it's like, oh, okay, it's time to check my box and meet my target, you're probably going to be like left in the lurch and unable to actually scramble and apply the right resources to be able to reach that. So kicking the can down the road is dangerous from a reputational risk perspective, because you do truly run the risk of not being able to meet that target. And then I'm guessing many of you on the call today are maybe familiar with Science-Based Targets Initiative, or SBTI. So they've recently set a requirement that if you're using carbon credits as a mechanism to supplement and offset those harder to abate emissions, that starting in 2030, any offsetting will have to be through carbon removals. So, there is technology around carbon removals emerging, but being able to lock in supply of those and being able to then, set yourself up for success to meet those goals, it's going to be really hard to wait. And like, you don't have to do everything at once, and you don't need to necessarily hit your targets early, though sometimes when you actually set that clear roadmap, you set yourself on track to do such, which is also awesome, right? Being able to communicate to consumers that you're ahead of schedule because you had a plan, you had milestones, and you hit them. Like, that's awesome. But I would just really discourage folks from waiting and kicking that can down the road, because all of these things take planning. And then also, technology is evolving, as is like the regulatory space here is evolving as well. So like proactively taking action can also set you up to be really proactive as some of these emerging regs might become, actual rules. So, there's a lot to be aware of in that regard. But I think I would say don't get caught flat-footed. Be ready and like make progress today. Like there's no reason that like you can't start participating in the voluntary carbon market ahead of your net zero targets, and there's no reason you can't start planning some of these projects even if you're not going to like break ground on constructing them tomorrow. So
I think it's really insightful to be aware of the risks that you pose by waiting, whether they're financial or reputational, and then I think understanding the journey of, yes, there is some low-hanging fruit that will seem easier at the beginning, but as you get to that incremental last bit, it just becomes more and more difficult to wrestle with bumping into technological hurdles or capital constraints or whatever they may be. So yeah, the risk of waiting makes total sense in terms of what you're explaining there. So for those that can't quite come to terms with making claims in the near term and who might say, I'd prefer to see what's mandatory before I make a firm movement in this arena, in the absence of regulatory requirements to make progress on sustainability, is there a cost associated with inaction? Sherry, maybe you can shed some light on this.
Absolutely. And if you want to just jump to the next slide, I mean, I think the reality is there is a cost, and and it's why we're very passionate about this here at Nielsen IQ. Like Nicole said, I mean, we've got the rise of the governance and the mandates, financial reporting, and even fines. We started off today's conversation, right, that we're seeing this increase in consumer demand. Consumers are shifting, their values are shifting, they're seeing more availability. But the reality is also, like the fact that climate change is, there's exploding costs, energy prices and supply chain. I'm going to shut my camera off. It looks like I keep disappearing. So sorry, I think I might be having a little internet issue. So the time really is now. And, we think 2040 is far away, but it is not far away, and so it really is time to start, we've kind of outlined here from a Nielsen IQ perspective, kind of what we're thinking in terms of short-term, mid-term, and long-term perspective. But we absolutely recommend that all clients, all companies, all sizes really start today if they haven't already.
That's just such great perspective there, and a great framework to think about things. And it is a tough realization, I think, to think about 2040, and then I think really only if you start to map it out, start to realize how quickly that can creep up on you as you start to go down that path. So to try to circle everything back together, I'm going to throw out a couple of final questions for both of you, and try to get your perspective on this and tie all your comments together across the whole gamut of things that we've talked about so far today. So what do each of you see as the biggest hurdle as well as opportunity with companies setting and reaching their targets? And maybe Nicole, you could lead us off, and then Sherry, you could go after Nicole.
Sure. So there's a lot of hurdles that can make it hard for folks to even get started. So, right, in the face of so much pressure to set targets and take action, I really feel like there's an information and education hurdle. So, like getting access to trained resources that know how to quantify your impacts, and being able to set pragmatic targets, or even learning how the voluntary carbon market works as a tool for action can be really overwhelming for people. And, we're seeing increased pressure from consumers, from stakeholders, from investors, and then also, upcoming regulatory pressures. So everyone's looking to make a claim, but I don't feel that people are always understanding the pathway to meet their claims. And so I do think a lot of that's educational, and helping these people make progress and understand how to get there is actually really one of my favorite parts about my job at CarbonBetter, right? Like I actually really see beyond doing math, like educating folks on how to take action and make progress is like a huge part of my job, and one that I am like most excited about. And then from an opportunity perspective, like I really feel like people who are front runners in their industry and making claims, they have a lot of opportunity to like drive innovation and inspire action from their competitors. So being one of the first folks in whatever space or arena you're operating in to make a claim, that in and of itself, by putting your data out there publicly, by sharing your math, by setting this target, you can inspire your competitors to do the same. We've all seen there is no easy button, right, in solving the climate crisis. And there's no one size fits all solution, right? Decarbonization looks very different depending on your industry. So I really see a lot of opportunity to innovate, to think creatively, as well as collaborate.
Oh, I love that, Nicole. I would, from an obstacle standpoint, I think, one of the things that we're kind of seeing as a hurdle for the industry is, where we're seeing sustainability departments kind of being separate, and, we think that that's really going to continue to be a challenge if we keep kind of this isolated approach and not fully integrated. We also kind of think a hurdle is when we also have marketing departments, though, come and say like, hey, we want to kind of use sustainability as a marketing claim. It's really not, it's everything, right? It's across the entire business. And so we think it's really, really key that the companies think that way, and it's going to inspire new innovations, and it's going to inspire changing business models. But definitely, I think one of the hurdles is if we kind of keep sustainability isolated or in a separate area. And I'll build on what you were saying, Nicole, in terms of like the kind of one of the opportunities. I mean, I think the exciting thing is this is a new way for us to think about collaborations and connections and horizontal and vertical, kind of alliances to address sustainability challenges. I mean, the reality is no one can do this alone. None of us can do it alone. And so I think thinking differently for companies about their competitors and sharing, and I really love, Nicole, how you emphasize, a couple times today, the importance of transparency, the importance of sharing your math, that this isn't an opportunity for us to think about differentiating, it's in a way, when we think about it, isn't this an ethical obligation for all of us? And doesn't that mean different things in terms of how we would work together and how we would share our resources differently to, really mitigate, the climate impact and the environmental impact? So those, I think, we've got some great, some challenges, but also some great opportunities.
Yeah. And I'd just love to like build on real quickly something you said about stakeholders, right? Like if sustainability is looked at in a vacuum, it's not something that can be, right? Like if you haven't done your environmental impacts yet, you'll quickly find out that like you need data from every facet of your business, including your suppliers. So you can't look at it without doing so as a team across really a number of stakeholders in your organization, from finance to operations to supply chain. Like it's not just an environmental exercise, it really is like a whole business exercise.
Such great answers and great discussion. So before we dive into our questions, I just wanted to put this slide up here and just give a little nod that CarbonBetter's next webinar will be next month. So please scan the QR code here for registration details, and we will be discussing new U.S. climate regulations. And are you ready for them? So a little bit of a teaser for what's coming up next. I'll leave that up for 1 second while I think we've got a bunch of questions that have filtered in, so we'll dive right in. I'll start with one that hopefully we can shed a little bit of quick answer to. The question is, are there any ideas for how to keep track of what sustainability topics are trending? I'm sure both of you keep track and read a ton of articles and things that come across your desk. What are some ways?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure, where the question originated from, but I will say, one of the things that we're finding. So as I mentioned, Nielsen IQ, we track the consumer packaged goods space, and I would say that this is definitely one of the areas where we're seeing a lot of other industries watching what's trending in the CPG space in particular, and the reason being, these are fast moving consumer goods. So this is kind of the day in and day out where consumers are making those choices about what's important to them and what their values are. It's easier to, pick up something in the grocery store shelf than it is to, wire your garage for an electric vehicle. And so I would say, just first and foremost, and I share, my role is to share a lot of the trends of what's happening across the sustainability. I would for sure be watching what's happening in CPG, because like I said, that's really that easy cost of entry for consumers of where they're telling us, voting with their dollars. And then, we also do a lot of consumer research that we share with the industry. And I think that the reality around sustainability is, as we kind of even intro this, it's evolving. And I think what you're going to see more and more of is we're going to see more nuances around what the environmental components are. But we're also going to continue to see this evolution of which we didn't touch on today, the social responsibility, and how consumers are looking at, again, is wellness democratized, and are people being treated well across the entire supply chain? I think that's an area that we're really starting to watch from a Nielsen IQ perspective, and really starting to see strong growth as well.
Yeah, and I'm just going to build onto that too. There's actually a lot of newsletters out there to track emerging news on these topics. Bloomberg Green is one, and then I actually like Climate Tech VC. That's one where you can like see where investment dollars are going in the sustainability space, and I think that can be really helpful to reference and just see like where are people spending their money as they work to solve the climate crisis. And Dominic, if you don't mind, can you go to the next slide? I just want to let people know that so each of these QR codes here will take you to the LinkedIn profiles of the panelists. So like if we don't get to all your questions today, feel free to reach out to us directly. We'd love to answer those offline as well.
That's a great point. Sorry,
no worries.
I need to get that up. So yes, if we don't get to your questions, or if there are things that pop up as you consider the answers and as you ruminate on this topic, feel free to reach out to any of the speakers and to any of us as you have them. I'm going to jump around a little bit. There was one that came in that I think was a really good question. So, how do businesses go about communicating progress to their everyday consumers that are interested in sustainability? How do organizations make their participation in this space visible?
That's a great question. And there are a number of ways they can do that. But I think one of the biggest ways is if you've taken the time to quantify your impacts and you want to make statements around those publicly, publishing a sustainability report that shares your impacts, shares your math, lets people know where you're at today can be a really helpful tool. We see folks publish those, on an annual cadence or even ad hoc, but putting that out there in a way that documents the choices you made, right? Beyond the math, there's a lot of trade-offs in this space, right? Like choosing packaging is complicated, and there's trade-offs with everything you do, from a sustainability perspective. So when you're reporting out on your math, it can also be really helpful to share those choices that you made. And then, you also, if you're in the CPG space, right, you have the opportunity to communicate that on your packaging, on your label, even. But I would just say, anytime you're doing that, making sure that you've given people the information to validate what you're putting out there. So lots of options to communicate that, and I'm sure Sherry can chime in as well. But I think one of the most common and important tools is actually publishing a sustainability report.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that, Nicole. I think one of the big things, and as you know, so we're in the consumer packaged goods space. One of the big things that we see from consumers is where they are looking for sustainability information and where brands are giving it to them. And the reality is they want it on pack. They want it easy, so that if they're in a store or if they're doing digital discovery, that they can have that information. And so many times, companies will say to us, "Oh yeah, we have a report. It's on our website." Well, the truth is, no, consumers aren't going to your website. I'm sorry, right? And so making it easy, and easy meaning, it could be as simple as a QR code
Mhm.
on your package that sends them to that report on your website. I think the other piece, in terms of the progress is I think we probably illustrated it, right? It's a little bit confusing and complicated, and there's a lot of claims. And so simple is important too for
Yep.
consumers, and so even, Nicole, as you were talking about, like, how do we even make it tangible of what a carbon, what that looks like?
Mhm.
And so I think, the opportunities for us is to continue to simplify this for consumers so that they can understand and, they're along for the ride with your brand. And
Yep.
so, they're along for the ride and tracking the progress. And I think it's okay also sharing the missteps along the way,
Mhm.
that full transparency of like, hey, we've had to, kind of change or adjust or whatever. Nobody's expecting perfection. They're really just expecting us to be making progress.
Yeah, no, that's a really great point. I think sometimes people are afraid to put their impacts out there or to share their claims because they're afraid of that misstep. They're afraid of being accused of greenwashing, and that fear can inhibit people. But I think, to your point about perfection, like we're also in a space where, um, you know, how to be perfect, right? And there's no such thing really, but that's evolving. So the right choice for sustainability today, we might find out 5 years from now is, not the best choice, or new options may emerge. So I think continuing to talk about those things is really important.
Those are such great points, and I think being candid and I think consumers often reward that candor of understanding why and how uh, people are arriving at those numbers and the clarity around that in a simple way that they can understand is often rewarded, I think. Um, Next question. Are you seeing companies who are participating in sustainability and these claims, I think, mandate that suppliers, sub, or other affiliates implement programs to continue to do business?
I would say yes. We are starting to see that, but it's also complicated. So my answer here is a little nuanced, right? Because, um, like we are seeing companies, try to push their supply chain to be better. But there's also cases where, supply chains are complicated. In some cases, you might only have one option for a certain ingredient or a certain part. So I think, it's like a yes, but right. We're starting to see brands and businesses push their supply chain to be better, but in some cases that's a phased approach where they're, requiring more information from their suppliers or requiring certain activities from their suppliers, even as far to as excluding certain suppliers. So it really depends on the nature of your operations, what choices you have in your supply chain. But I do think we are starting to see a trend that people are pushing their supply chains to be better.
Okay, Sherry, unless you have anything to add there, the next question, I think there's two more, so hopefully we can squeeze these in here at the end. How do we leverage on the experiences of consumers to raise the ambitions of corporate entities?
Mhm. It's interesting, I will say. So one of the things that we saw in the research, right, is that consumers are saying sustainability is more important. But then when I kind of shared at the beginning, but then when you look at what they're doing for sustainability, it's very kind of day in and day out tactical, right? Like taking a recyclable bag or eating leftovers or minimizing food waste. And I think that as we know that consumers are looking to brands and they're looking to retailers to be the big solve, I think there's a really great opportunity for aspirational, like aspirational messaging and aspirational, like we're all in this together, but here's what we're doing, as a brand. And then here's what you can do as a consumer to kind of play into that journey, play into what we're doing. Unfortunately, there is also, we don't talk about this often, but in our research, there's also a set of consumers who are apathetic, who are like, I'm not doing more. I don't know what to do. This is so flipping overwhelming. What should I do? And so we think that's a great opportunity again for brands and for retailers to kind of say, hey, here's what we're doing. And here's the stuff you can do is, like supporting us supports this bigger initiative. But again, I think it's a lot around building that bigger vision, but in a simple way for consumers. So it doesn't feel that they have to know everything about carbon and water and all types of packaging.
Yeah, I love that.
And one final question. I think we sort of answered it. You guys gave your thoughts on it, but maybe with a little more specificity. This question asks, I'm wondering what are some of the most challenging barriers to entry, specifically for anyone looking to get started and participate in this space? I know we talked about challenges and opportunities, but and Nicole, you did talk about this a bit, but specifically about barriers to entry into the space.
Yeah, I would just say in general, even as someone that is in the space, it can feel more complicated than it should be. And that can be hard to overcome. So I think, there is that education component of just, learning and exploring. And then there's like there can be a financial barrier, right? We see so many small consumer packaged goods brands that have really strong ideals and they want to save the planet, but they also want to sell as much oat milk as they can, and their margins are tight, and they might not truly have the budget to be better right now. So I think that, finances can be a barrier to entry as well. So I think those would be the two I'd focus on, would be, just cost as well as complexity.
I think that was great, Nicole. I think those are the definitely immediate ones.
Well, I think that's all we had, and we are right on top of the time limit, so that's pretty perfect. I want to sincerely thank both of our speakers, Sherry Frey and Nicole Sullivan, for generously taking your time to be here today. Hopefully, you all listening found this super informative. I know I did. It's always a fun time to be in the space and to learn every day and every moment as we all kind of travel this path together. As a reminder, there is a QR code here for our next webinar about new U.S. climate regulations and are you ready? So Scan that code, registration details are there, and we look forward to hopefully seeing you at our next webinar. And thank you all so much for being a part of the webinar. It should be available for replay and sharing once it can be uploaded, so just give us a little bit of time to get that squared away. And again, scan that QR code, and we look forward to hosting you for our next one. Thanks, everybody.
Right. Thanks, y'all.
Thanks, everyone.